Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. We're going to have some Stella Kamala content for you shortly, but first, a trigger warning for all the sensitive souls out there. The following clip will have Lefties Lose It. Here is Pastor Gino Jennings expressing his disdain for those who don't know what a woman is, including President Joe Biden. Remember him? He's apparently still president.
Congressmen in Congress trying to define what a woman is.
That's right.
What is a woman? It's your mama. It sure ain't your daddy. What's a woman? Your mama. President Biden joining in on the conversation. We didn't know what a woman is. we didn't know what a woman is. A woman is your mama. That man is past 80, isn't it? You mean to tell me you past 80 and you don't know your mama and your wife is a woman?
Hallelujah. Now, here is a woman who should be listening to the good pastor, because I can guarantee you she won't be able to answer the question, what is a woman? Let's hear from Delta Airlines top DEI officer, that's diversity, equity and inclusion, and her plan to make air travel more woke and gender inclusive.
So we're beginning to take a hard look at things like our gatehouse announcements. You know, we welcome ladies and gentlemen, and we've asked ourselves, is that as gender inclusive as we want to be? You know, we're looking at some legacy language that exists in some of our employee manuals and getting to the root of the way some things are described.
Now let's go to the UK and the so-called anti-racism protests. That's not what they actually are, and some of those attending cannot even distinguish between illegal or legal migration or what taxpayer money is being spent on. Listen to this young virtue signalling ignoramus.
Is it anti-immigration or illegal immigration? What do you say?
I don't think anybody's illegal.
I hear this a lot. What makes refugees not illegal?
Because people aren't illegal.
Of course, but when they come into the country without passports, what can you do about that?
We can welcome them in. They're refugees, they're asylum seekers, they're fleeing persecution.
Right. And how do you feel about the taxpayer having to pay for that?
The taxpayer doesn't pay for that. I'm answering enough questions.
Okay. Apparently the taxpayer doesn't pay for illegal immigrants.
Now, times are hard and inflation is biting, but if you rely on tips for your income, perhaps don't be an entitled prat like this next dude.
There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I just want to say it's a nice house for a $5 tip.
You're welcome.
He looked like he was delivering one pizza there. How much of a tip did he expect? Now, talking about entitled young men, these two miscreants really are deplorable. Watch as they laugh when caught vandalising a shop owner's outdoor space, even as he tells them how much it costs him.
Are you serious, man? Man, are you serious? I paid $16K for this whole place to rebuild it.
You 16K?
Yeah, yes.
This
Someone
guy didn't
started.
stand it.
So,
He didn't stand it, dude.
So,
terrible.
it's $25,000 fine. So I can forward this video to the cops and see what they're gonna do.
They have absolutely no fear of the police there, or the fact that they're on camera committing crimes. I mean, is vandalism still a crime in blue states? Now to a regular on this segment, and frankly, I've missed her. She may no longer be on The View, but she keeps bringing the goods, and her Trump derangement syndrome shows no signs of improvement. Here is Rosie O'Donnell.
Are you watching this moron speak? Can he form a coherent sentence? He is the worst thing that ever happened, period. And he's just babbling like an incoherent. He's like Dr. Doom. He's the worst thing.
Now to another lefty celebrity losing it. Here is how LeBron James treats a young fan.
Congratulations, LeBron.
Stop. Don't do that.
Congratulations, LeBron.
Champion!
Awful, awful. He ain't no Jordan, that's for sure. He's more the male Megan Rapinoe. Remember her? I've missed her too. Here she is at Seattle's Pride Parade, refusing to answer a very simple question.
Your U.S. women's soccer team famously lost to high school boys. Do you really think it's fair for these same boys to be competing in girls' sports? Why should trans people compete against young girls? Do you not think that they're going to get hurt? Are they going to get hurt?
Oh, how clever to take a drink so she doesn't have to answer. Yes, Meghan supports trans women, i.e. men, competing against women, even though an under-15 boys squad smashed the national team. Now, let's have some Kamala action, and she really is an intellectual, a leader of rare ability and courage and principle. So much principle.
I'm going to get mad when we have an attorney general who is trying to resuscitate the war on drugs.
Yes, can we talk?
And he thinks the greatest evil that mankind has ever seen is marijuana.
It's gateway.
Like, I've said this, and you've seen this in my emails. Yeah. Leave grandma's medical marijuana alone. Just leave it alone.
So...
This is the same woman who convicted almost 2,000 people for marijuana violations and sent many of them to prison. Did she think no one would remember that? Well, the bulk of the American media has forgotten, and Kamala herself seems to have a few memory issues.
How dare we speak Merry Christmas? How dare we?
Merry Christmas, everyone.
And the vice president seems to think that one pumps electricity into an EV, an electric vehicle, like you pump gas into a regular car. Watch this hilarity.
And there's no sound or fume.
There is nothing.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's
so
all there is to it.
For all of us who are used to
every morning
filling our tank, you usually can smell it and you can hear it. You can hear the guzzling sound.
Right.
None of that.
None of
so
it.
how do I know it's actually working?
It is.
I wonder how many hours she would stand there just holding the Bowser. And let's now go to a non-binary dog. Watch this and try to figure out if the owner is serious or mocking the painfully woke. I'd like to think it's the latter.
Oh my God, your dog is so cute. Can I pet her?
Oh, they is actually non-binary, but you can pet they if you'd like.
Thank you.
It's really not okay to misgender dogs.
And let's end Lefties this week with this classic bit of comedy from Stephen Hughes about being offended. This never gets old.
I want to live in a democracy, but I never want to be offended again. Well, you're an idiot. How do you make a law about offending people? How do you make it an offence to offend people? Being offended is subjective. That has everything to do with you as an individual or a collective or a group or a society or a community, your moral conditioning, your religious beliefs. What offends me may not offend you. And you want to make laws about this? I'm offended when I see boy bands, for God's sake. It's a valid offence. I'm offended. They're corporate shills posing as musicians to further a modelling career, and frankly, I'm disgusted. Right? But what am I going to do? Call the cops? Hello, it's me again. They're on the telly this time. 5 of them, that's it. Yeah, white suits, dancing like girls, that's them. 5 minutes, I'll be out the front traumatised. Bye.
Now we'll be looking at more Lefties losing it content with my next guest, Sky News contributor Kosha Gator. Kosha, let's start with CNN and their typically anti-Trump content, but there was a dose of reality in amongst that TDS, and it came from an unlikely source, pollster Frank Luntz, who's no Trump fan, but he can't hide this trend. This data is remarkable.
But I assure you, that Donald Trump is doing better among the average union member, not teachers' unions and not the unions for government, but everybody else, the trades, the people who work with their hands. He's doing better among them than any Republican has done in decades. This is not going to be a problem for him. The union leadership is more divided from their membership, and the louder that it gets, the greater the divides are going to come. And in my focus groups, and this is remarkable to me, the union membership says they don't speak for me. And I've been doing this now since I hate to say this, 89, 1990. I've never had union people publicly say they don't speak for me.
Kosha, that was sobering news for the panel. What do you make of those insights?
That's probably the best news Trump has received in the last 2 weeks, where there's been a lot of discussion about the air coming out of the balloon as the race resets with Kamala Harris. The key for him is the working class, and that comment about the tradies, to use Australian parlance, go straight to that. He won them by some remarkable margin in 2016. I think it was 36 points, highest ever in history, that group. He lost a little bit of that in 2020, but still had a huge margin. And right now, some polls are saying that Kamala Harris has actually really shrunk that margin for him even more, and that is the key to his victory. So if true, and if he can continue to build on that, that is going to be what is on his path to 270. And it was, I think, sobering news as a result of that for the CNN panel.
And very interesting too, that divide between the average union member and their leadership. And you wonder how sustainable that model is, where you're paying your dues to people who really are not representing your interests,
and don't like you.
And don't like you. But like union members, Trump is also enjoying a level of support from Hispanic voters, Republicans seldom seen, if ever seen. The latest GE poll, the national GE poll commissioned by Fox News, shows that Trump is leading Kamala by just 1% amongst the national vote. But when you look at the Hispanic voters, the lead is 6%, 52 to 46, against something back in 2016. If you suggested this, you'd be thrown into some sort of an asylum kosher.
The Hispanic vote is really interesting because it's the fastest growing demographic in the US, and Trump has made inroads with them. I think Bush actually did quite well with them, maybe surprising to many. And then after that, Republicans don't do that well.
No.
Trump did. He raised and grew his support with them in 2020 versus 2016. And if that trend holds, given that that group is growing and they are in some of those battleground states, there are certainly pockets of them, it could be quite interesting. I think, it is his policies on the economy and all of that. A lot of them are small business owners, and that resonates with them. Also, it's a personality, sort of that machismo aspect of the Trump personality, I think resonates a lot, certainly with Hispanic men.
And I think also when it comes to the culture wars, because that demographic tends to be socially conservative. They do not like all this pronoun indoctrination in schools, all the extremes that elements of the left, particularly in the Democrats, have gone. I think that would be leaving a lot of them uncomfortable, and not just Hispanic voters, but a lot of other migrant groups. And this is something, again, the left, the media, activists don't seem to understand. There's a marked difference between legal migrants and illegal immigrants. And legal migrants are often the ones who are most vehemently against illegal immigration.
Absolutely, because they know what it's like to have gotten in and what a gift it is to come from the countries that they come from and to be in here. And they're probably even more offended, I think, by others from where they come from cutting the line and crossing over illegally.
Especially if they don't have those shared values, they don't have the work ethic, perhaps. That's, I think, all part of it. Now, let's talk about the economic credentials of Kamala Harris's VP pick. A prominent business leader and Shark Tank host Kevin O'Leary has slammed Tim Walz's record as governor of Minnesota.
I'm looking at the track record of an individual who came into a state and wiped out job creation. He wiped out job creation in professional, in manufacturing, in accounting, in every subcategory you look at. Those jobs moved to South Dakota and North Dakota. The South Dakota job rate right now is 4 times that of Minnesota. Minnesota only creates jobs in services that are funded by the government, healthcare and social services. Every other sector is in decline. He's also added a surcharge of 1%, 100 basis points, on top of 9.8% taxes on individuals that are retiring. And of course they're leaving the state in drones.
Kosher, that seems to be true for many leftist governments, including right here in Australia, particularly here in Victoria. The jobs growth tend to be taxpayer-funded jobs whilst businesses are fleeing. And that data comparing North and South Dakota to Minnesota is very interesting.
It is, and indeed, some would say that's by design with left-leaning governments and not by defect, because it shores up their power structure if you have more and more people dependent on the government, including for their jobs. The thing that the U.S. has, it's really a built-in structural advantage that is less so here, is it has 50 states. So there's more of that option for mobility, interstate mobility, than there is, given Australia's structure. And you see that where Minnesota, I think, is in the top 15 states with outflowing migration, people fleeing. So New York, California are at the top. But Minnesota is, just as that mentions, and it definitely accelerated under his watch for a lot of his policies, economic, COVID, and everything else. So I think that's a point the other team should keep hitting on.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that many of the top 10 states that citizens are fleeing from tend to be blue, and the ones they go to tend to be red. Florida, Texas, Tennessee, one of the biggest beneficiaries of that domestic migration. And you mentioned New York, California, Minnesota. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Tim Walz. He's also under fire for a massive COVID-19 fraud that happened under his watch as Minnesota governor. More than $250 million of federal money was defrauded, and it was one of the largest pandemic-era fraud schemes anywhere in the US. The alleged perpetrators used a Minnesota-based non-profit organisation called Feeding Our Future, which the Minnesota Department of Education was supposed to be overseeing. They did a very poor job of that overseeing. It's astonishing that this went on for so long on such a grand scale without it being nipped in the bud. And you looked at the details, it wasn't a particularly sophisticated program. You would have thought it would have been spotted early.
Yes, I think, it goes to just when there's so much money sloshing around, as there was, especially in the wake of COVID, and there's no accountability with these bloated organizations. Things that shouldn't slip through the cracks do, or people look the other way, or they're hamstrung, or what other reasons are. Politically, I'm not sure this one will land as potently against Walz as others, just because it's more of an indirect indictment of his leadership. Overall, he was overseeing the state, but he wasn't in the nitty-gritty of this particular thing. There are far more other direct indictments of him, as we just discussed, the mass exodus of people leaving Minnesota and his policies on various issues.
Well, putting tampons in boys' restrooms. You've got the stolen valor issue. Yeah. We've got him talking up socialism as being neighbourly. The list is long. Kamala Harris, as you mentioned, she is flying at the moment, getting enormously positive press, doing so much better in the polls than Joe Biden was. But is this Walz decision going to cause her damage? Because there just seems to be more and more that comes out with him, and you wonder if he was properly vetted.
I do think that the vetting is an issue because of how this whole thing went down, and they were pretending to support Biden for as long as they did, and then this last-minute switcheroo. So now you've got what would happen in 18 months condensed in 90 days. So I'm sure they knew these things, but they didn't have the time to really vet it. And these people, she herself, have never been through a competitive primary process or anything else. So there's plenty there. As you say, it's a long list. Yeah. But she's got this clear strategy of running out the clock, getting very favorable media or no media. And that seems to be what's on the ballot.
I think she's counting on a honeymoon all the way to November. Kosha Gator, thank you so much for your time this evening.